For the past 7 months, the world has been fiercely combating the spread as well as impact of COVID-19, a task that has definitely not been an easy one. But despite these challenges that most of us are facing, imagine going through the same without any water, little food, no possessions of your own, or even a place to call home. As of December 2019, the number of forcibly displaced persons stood at approximately 79.5 million. Of these, 26 million were refugees, 45.7 were internally displaced persons, 4.2 million were asylum seekers, and 3.6 million were Venezuelans displaced abroad.
I think it's also important to recognize that across the world, nearly 70% of refugees, 60 to 70%, we estimate, live outside of camps. And those are people who are living in places that, where they often have jobs that are in the informal sector. They may own businesses, they work in restaurants, they work in markets, and unofficial markets. And these urban refugees in this country, across this region, and across the world are the ones that have been hit very, very hard. They need water, they need food, they need shelter. These are things that everyone knows that they need. And of course, in the time of COVID, they need additional hand washing facilities. They need areas where they can properly social distance. But these are sort of the essential things. And that's what refugees need a lot to keep them safe. Now, the issue becomes, of course, that we're not just dealing with COVID. In places like DRC, in places like the Sahel, and even in some parts of Somalia and South Sudan, you still have places where there's ongoing conflict.
And speaking of ongoing crisis, Michael Arunga is an emergency communications specialist working for World Vision. He is currently based in Bamako, Mali, in response to the ongoing humanitarian crisis in the country.
Mali has a humanitarian crisis of major proportions, over 4 million people who are in need of humanitarian support. And we have a conflict that has affected people, especially in central and northern Mali, where people have been displaced because of attacks from seeking to move into more secure areas.
Michael, who was stationed in Mali prior to the COVID-19 outbreak, admits that the pandemic has indeed brought with it a different set of challenges.
It makes me extremely sad because this is a crisis within another crisis. So they are already extremely desperate within the kind of environments. They still don't have proper health facilities.
Well, this has been an extraordinarily challenging period. I think, as you said, for everyone in the world, but particularly for people who were already vulnerable. As I spoke about in camps, they're often overcrowded. So, and hand washing and sanitation can be a challenge.
They need food, they need clean water, which is actually not the case. So the world actually needs to pay attention.
So we've really been trying to step up our hand washing stations and distribution of soap. Then with social distancing, because things are so crowded, we have tried to at least do what we can and change the way that we distribute assistance. So rather than every 2 weeks or every week that food aid is given out, we might do it once a month so that people don't have to gather unnecessarily. And when they are gathering, there's often space that adheres to social distancing guidelines while they wait.
In addition to this, the various humanitarian organizations are exercising creativity with regards to funding so as to ensure continuity of their operations.
The countries that offer support are also affected. So they need to deal with the conditions within their backyard. And they have been hit hard. So we've been able to reroute some of their development funding into COVID response to be able to ensure that we try to slow down the curve in terms of the rapidly increasing numbers.
I think one thing that COVID has really shown is just how interconnected we all are. We have launched several appeals to help with funding for COVID preparedness and response. And the international community has done a great job of coming through and helping with the funding for that. Most of our appeals have been quite well funded.
So, as the world marks this year's World Refugee Day, what message do they have for us?
Well, the message that we're sending for World Refugee Day this year is that everyone can make a difference and every action counts. And that goes to the fight against COVID, that goes to standing up with refugees and displaced people around the world.
We need to reach out and support those who cannot be able to speak out for themselves. Heavily affected by the crisis, attacks. We have people who attack and capture and so forth, which makes it difficult in terms of access. So it's important to be able to ensure that we think about the refugees, we think about the IDPs.
79.5 million, that's 1% of all of the world's population is displaced. But that's 79.5 million people, 79.5 million hearts, 79.5 million hopes and dreams. And every individual has their own story. And they can all contribute. When you look at COVID, for example, refugees are making masks, they're making soap, hand sanitizer, they're playing active roles in communicating about prevention measures. And I think that's because it's not just about protecting themselves, but also about protecting the communities that they live in.
The message this World Refugee Day from the various institutions, organizations and individuals is that despite what is happening in the world, we cannot stop lending a helping hand and helping our brothers and sisters in need. For Chams Media, my name is Michael Zimanji.